So we've talked a bit about dominant colours. We know a bit about how our chart works. Let's actually start, shall we? Now, one of the tips in the book, in the pattern for the Ingleborough hot water bottle, for example, is that when you know you're coming up to work in your chart, you really want to be ready to knit with that contrast colour straight away. But in order to get it nice and secure, I like to join the colour in a bit sooner than when it's needed. So if I look at my chart here, I'm going to need it on stitch 4 of this particular pattern. I think it might be different on the hot water bottle cover. So to make sure I'm ready to go from stitch 1 if I wanted to, I like to start joining it in a little bit towards the end of the previous round. So I'm just going to take a few stitches back here and show you how to secure in the yarn, the second yarn, to start working with it. I'm at the end here of the last round that I'm knitting before I'm going to start my chart. I've got 4 stitches to go, so I know I'm about to use this yarn. I want to catch it in nice and securely. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my needle in as if to knit the next stitch, get the end of my new colour. Oops, let's take some of that off. I'm going to lay it over my work, holding it under my thumb. Can you see that my working yarn is coming underneath that? I'm going to knit the stitch, and when I let go, it is caught in. If I show you the back, you can see that it's caught under there, it's secure. So I've got a yarn caught in. I'm just going to keep catching it along. And the way I'm going to do that, this is super clever. I've got my needle through as if to knit. I'm actually going to put it over the top of the needle. Can you see it's over the top of the needle? It's not coming under, it's coming over the top of the needle, just laying over. I'm going to put my yarn round as if to knit, and then I'm going to drop the green back down again and finish knitting the stitch. Okay, holding it in place. Going to knit one more stitch. I'll show you the back, and it is held in nice and secure. Let's do it one more time because I want it to be right at the end of the yarn of the needle and ready to go. Make sure that both yarns are at the end of both needles, beginning and end. Okay, so over the top it goes, around goes my pink yarn, finish knitting my stitch. Let me just turn it around, and you can see both yarns are there and ready to work. Okay, so that yarn is caught in nice and securely. We haven't started working it yet. We haven't put any, if I show you from the front, you can't really see it at all. We haven't put any colour in there yet, but it's just held in place and ready for us to work. Okay, so I am now in the starting position, ready to work. Let's get my chart. Ready to work round 1 of this chart. So the first 3 stitches we can see are pink. However, I want to carry my green along because I want to keep it with me. Just for this starting one, the starting stitch, I'm going to carry it along. So when I am ready to work, I'm going to just make sure that that green yarn is twisted over the top of this pink yarn, and I'm going to knit my first stitch. So that yarn is coming round the corner with me. Let's do that again. So now it's carried along. We can do what we were doing before, which is to put it over the top and then knit our stitches. Okay. Right, so I have knit stitches 1, 2 and 3. My green yarn is ready to go. So I told you that the carrying the yarn across is called floats. Those floats, you don't need to carry the yarn across that frequently to how I've just done it. It's just that I want it in the starting position. You can go a full 5 stitches quite happily and carry your yarn across. So if I look up here on round 3, I've got a big stretch of 5 pink stitches here. There's going to be no green used there at all. It's going to be perfectly fine for me to carry that yarn from that stitch to that stitch and not catch it in at all. It's really perfectly fine. But for now, let's go back to where we are. I've done my first 3 pink stitches. My contrast stitch is coming up. That's my green. So I'm now going to just pick up my green and knit it. So I've put my needle into knit just as normal. Here, how I choose to carry this yarn now, this is where the dominant comes in. Okay, sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But whether I choose to go over the top of that pink or underneath that pink, that is what is going to make the difference on that pattern. That is what decides whether my yarn is dominant or not. Now, to me, dominant, you would think, oh, well, it will go over the top because, you know, being on top, dominant. But in actual fact, my dominant colour comes underneath. All right, it comes underneath that pink yarn. And the way to describe it really is it is closest, always closest to the back of the work. So if I were to turn my work over and I've got 2 yarns going across, okay, I want to keep this pink away from the back of the yarn. So the green always is closest to the back of the work. Okay, that's how we're going to interpret dominant in this scenario. So always goes underneath the pink yarn or the non-dominant yarn. Your dominant yarn is always closest to the back of the work. So I'm just going to make my 1 stitch in the contrast colour. Now I'm back to 1 stitch in pink. So here we go again. The pink is not my dominant colour, so it's not coming underneath, it is going over the top. So dominant comes underneath and the non-dominant goes over the top. So my pink is over the top of the green. Okay, it's worth practice. It will take practice. It really will take practice if you haven't done this before, but it very soon will click into place and you are going to be delighted with the results. So stitch number 6 is my contrast again, and it is the dominant colour, so it's going underneath the yarn. Okay, so as we work around, I've got a little row of 3. Many Fairisle projects will be very repetitive, and you'll be able to get into a rhythm very quickly along your rows. For example, if I look at this little pattern here, it is repetitive, isn't it? You know, I could break it up 3 1 1 1 3 1 1 1 3 1 1 1. You know, you've got a rhythm to it, and you can rattle along here probably at quite the clip. There's no need to catch in any of those contrast colours as you go along. 3 stitches is perfectly fine to carry it along. What I want to do now is look at how you allow enough space to make sure those floats aren't too small. Let's just stop and have a look at the back. So you can see, okay, you can see in this little group of 3 that the green yarn has been carried across. Now if I scooch them together, but that float is nice and baggy so that I can stretch it out no problem and it's not pulling. Let me show you what happens if I pull that too tight. So I'm going to do the next 3 stitches and I'm going to do them really close together, and I'm going to carry the green yarn across the back, and I'm going to carry it across far too tight. So I'm pulling it really tight, and I'm going to make my next stitch, and I'll do the next couple so you can see what's happening. Right, so I've done enough there. I'm going to try and spread that out. My earlier one I carried nice and loose. This one here, look, it's sitting perfectly happy. I've got lots of space to spread that out, and when it comes off the needles, it's going to sit there quite happily. However, here, I have pulled these really tight. So I cannot stretch my stitches out sufficiently. If I show you on the back, you can see those pieces of thread there are absolutely as tight as anything. So I cannot stretch my stitches out. They won't sit straight. They will group and bunch together. This is a photo of the back of the work after I've added a few more rounds, and I've tried to be careful to leave those floats travelling along the back of the stitches, to leave them nice and loose and baggy. You can see they're not pulling too tight here at all. I'm going to work along because I do want to show you how to catch the yarn in on a longer on a longer stretch of stitches. Now you will notice as I work along here, I'm holding both yarns together, and my finger, I'm just choosing which yarn to work with using that finger. It's just kind of naturally evolved like this particular hold. You're going to find whatever works for you. There is absolutely no problem in dropping your yarns and using one at a time. If you do that, my advice would be to have one on one side of you and one on the other side of you. Okay, that works really well. And I find put your dominant yarn over to the left, because then it naturally will sort of sit in the right place for you to bring it under the other yarn. For some reason it just works well. So I'm going to carry on working off camera until we get to round 3, because that's when we've got some longer sections where I can show you how to catch it. Although you don't need to, I'm going to use it to demonstrate catching the yarn in the middle of a long stretch of stitches. So I'm going to get up to round 3 and then show you the next little bit of technique.